Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Ferraro. Linda Ferraro is someone who I look forward to hearing about, hearing from, talking with, and I have done so for over 20 years. She's a collector, an attractor, someone who's always coming up with the latest and really smartest approaches to managerial leadership effectiveness in her corporate roles, in her consulting roles, as a teacher of management. She's got it all. I never end a call or a conversation with her without a tip on something else really cool to read to help me in my own practice. So I think you're going to enjoy meeting Linda Ferraro. Linda Ferraro, I find myself wanting to have a word or two about each person with whom I have this kind of conversation about practice. And just before you jumped on this call, I wrote down the word attractor. Not attractive, yes you are, but attractor. And that is one who draws toward, in your case, you, people, particularly ideas, which I've known you a long time, and I know you love ideas. And within those scope of ideas, which could be about anything, a lot of interest in leadership. And certainly now, in the middle of this, hopefully in the middle, or maybe past the middle of this pandemic shutdown, leadership has become something different, and maybe that's something we can talk about. But what do you think? You are an attractor.
Thank you, Dave. I like that. So I'm going to go with the fact that you know me better and other people that you've spoken to in some cases than they know themselves. One of the things that has been important to me during the last few months, and certainly in terms of the transition that we've made in the workplace and also in academic settings, is to understand the things that will support people and help them to be successful. And for me specifically, I've been spending a lot of time just kind of playing around with the concept of contemplation in action, and how we can truly understand what is going on around us without making assumptions about what we think is happening. So for me, I've really been looking at humility and compassion. So humility from the standpoint of, I really don't know someone else's circumstances. So if they are showing up on a call, if we are having a get together for a class or a work meeting, I really don't know what's going on in their world until I have an opportunity to ask them and find ways to support them. So a lot of what this has really brought forth in me is understanding the concept of how are we checking in. And specifically checking in with teams can certainly be some of what you're seeing with organizations holding more video conferencing events that are not just work meetings, but also more social in certain aspects. But also if you are using the tools that are available to you, are you getting feedback from people that you can then take action on? And the reason that I mention that is that I've become a big fan of using polling questions and things during sessions, either online or on a webinar, to give people an opportunity to go to an external site and just vote. You know, the smiley faces when you walk out of some international airport bathrooms and you hit the button about how clean you felt it was. I would use those regularly to check in with people and then just have a conversation and allow anybody who was interested in jumping in to talk about how were they doing? What was the week like?
What are you finding? What is the pattern of responses to that wonderful question?
So what I'm finding is that the importance of checking in regularly is key, that it isn't just a one and done for a period of time. So checking in regularly, acknowledging the fact that there are different things going on in organizations and with people, to then give them an opportunity to talk about how things are going. One of the pieces that I found particularly key was the importance of setting clear objectives with the teams. So whether that is in an organizational setting or even in a university setting, it doesn't mean that you have to make unilateral decisions. You can modify due dates on projects based upon the input that the team is giving you. And it's not that we didn't know the importance of this before, but it's certainly taken on a different significance at the moment.
Yeah, I think the kimono is open, the the shades are up, all of different analogies to what, when you do connect with people, what's revealed, and perhaps the media, the Zoom kind of experience opens up more than we ever could realize. On the other hand, why you're speaking to people this way is because we can't be physically together. And what I'm curious about in terms of your catching up, in other words, you're attracting to you something beyond your own assumptions about how people are doing, is how you think their primary responsibilities are doing for them right now. And this is what I mean. You interact with both university folk and also clients and your company's team. And all those folks prior to us being separated probably had a real strong sense of purpose and practice. And, I know what I'm doing and I know why, and I know others do too. But a lot of that has also been stripped away. A lot of the certainty that people carried with them, with their titles and all the rest, is kind of pushed aside a bit. So what are your thoughts? What are you finding out about people in that regard?
So interestingly, what I'm finding out about people goes back to a Harvard Business Review article I read several years ago about the neurodiverse workforce.
Hmm?
And what has really come up in terms of people being comfortable in sharing and letting me understand a little bit more about what is the best way for them to work, or what they like, basically what they prefer. What I'm finding is that there are people who did not speak up that much in person, who are much more forthcoming in this kind of environment. Certainly, whether you're using a webcam or not does make a difference, but I've had students and other individuals tell me that they like to be able to move while they present. So the fact that they didn't have to be sitting in a room at a table or connected in a way that didn't allow them to physically move around the room has freed them to deliver their message in ways that I had never heard before. And I found that to be really fascinating because, again, it goes back to that reading from years ago that talked about how are we supporting people in the workplace and in learning settings based upon what the tools give us the opportunity to take advantage of. And it isn't just sitting, for instance, having a Zoom meeting where we're looking at each other, or any other platform from that perspective, but it could be listening to a podcast while you're climbing the small hill, as you are allowing your mind to take in the sights around you to help spur innovation and creativity.
Well, of course, listening to the Fear on Veil podcast, now featuring Linda
That's
Ferraro. But there's something interesting about that. I think people being freed in a way from their customary context, as Peter and I talked about, that you're always in some context. You're never outside of a context. But as you move forward in time, contexts change somewhat, as do circumstances. So the adaptive requirement is certainly there for those who are seriously going to continue what they love to do best.
Mhm.
And so what I pick up on is that people are showing you now something you might have not even noticed in your OD consulting kind of walkarounds and companies that you serve, where they are in their desk and they are in their routines and they're in the uniforms of the day, and now they're saying, hey, didn't you ever know that I'm restless, I like to get up and walk about, I like to be seeing a lot more nature when I'm coming up with my ideas than in a conference room with a whiteboard. So your thoughts on that? Freeing people.
I've definitely seen it even from just the last couple months that there were individuals that I had relationships with in a previous customary context that weren't particularly forthcoming about their ideas, but would email me afterwards and tell me what they were thinking. I found that they were much more comfortable without even an invitation, a formal invitation to be brought into the discussion, bringing it up and things up themselves. So it's fascinating when you're dealing with technology and you have multiple forms of input. So someone can provide still some level of visual cues within that type of web delivery format. They can take themselves off of mute and speak, or they can busily use the chat function.
Mm.
And there are some individuals that started out using the chat function more often because it was more comfortable for them. But over a period of time, they moved to being much more open in the meeting setting than they were in person. And I think recognizing that level of evolution, that level of comfortable environment is something that's important for us to pay attention to.
Keep that one as we move forward, and don't default back to the less comfortable environment. But this also underscores my thought of you being an attractor, because in order for people to open up, because you're witnessing this, they have to be comfortable with you. They have to know what you're going to do with their information. And this has been you for as long as I've known you, it was quite a while, and that you have had many experiences where you've had to work with people in very confidential kind of work roles, the senior leaders and so forth, and yet you've got to open them up in order to be helpful to them as a coach or as a trainer or however you define yourself. So, what is it about you, Linda, that makes it, even for me, very comfortable to talk to you?
Oh, Dave, you had to make this challenging for me, didn't you?
Of course.
I do think that there is a level of curiosity that I have about what others are doing. So what they're working on, or their perspective, as well as the fact that, to me, pattern recognition is an important skill. And I look to see the kinds of things that can be put together to make a whole that's much greater than the sum of its parts. And what's fascinating in listening to the podcast and also looking at just the cadre of individuals you've had in the past, these have been people who I have connected with because of you. So I think those linkages are particularly important to understand how we have much more in common across disciplines than we ever thought we did.
Yeah. I underscore again the curiosity factor, but if you're not nosy, you're curious, and there's a big difference. And the other point you just made about a network of patterns of relationships, certainly from both our work over the years, this has been very, very important to see connections among people and help them see it too. And I can't imagine us doing less of that going forward. But in each of those persons that I chose, and the ones who will be coming up on future postings, have something particularly strong about them, and that is unfettered learning. They simply will not be told, you can't learn that, you can't know that. And so they always exceeded, when they were my students, any level of expectation I had, and went beyond, and they do it in their work. And so do you. You just someone can't. I think if they said, no, Linda, you can't know that, wouldn't them be fighting words, as we say
Uh,
in Maine?
uh, they've proven to be many times in the past.
And though you lost that job and you lost and that gig, but you were honest. I mean, isn't that something that matters a lot to you? What Peter would call your learning practice?
It matters to me to also take from people like you and others the things that I've gained just by being around you.
Mhm.
And those are the pieces that help to really form your perspective towards the work in general. So if you aren't bringing the learning that you've gathered over a period of time and your perspective to it, but simply providing what someone wants to hear, then first of all, the practice won't be meaningful. And ultimately, you aren't going to keep the work because someone will see that it's just simply an individual regurgitating what they've heard before. So I think all of those pieces are particularly key. I think, though, what is important now is an understanding that flexibility is key to being successful in the workplace in general. It wasn't that it wasn't important before, but I think what we're finding is that individuals who had an opportunity to just kind of call it in and go home don't have those options anymore because there's an expectation that you're going to raise your game. And whatever raise your game looks like, whether it is in an academic setting over the course of this last semester, there will be individuals who are clearly the stars because they have a desire to understand what makes the product better, or what helps a student to learn, or what helps a team member to be more successful, requires all of us to get out of just our own head and our own perspective. And I think that's part of one of the challenges when there's so many surveys around. So organizations consistently are asking employees, what do you think? What do you think? Well, if the culture is such that employees feel comfortable stating what they really feel, it's a tremendous resource that requires you to then further delve into what do you do with this gold mine. And if it's just simply asking questions and not doing anything about it, then you will engender people's distrust. Why should I complete this feedback survey? Because you won't be doing anything with it anyway.
Mhm.
And if I tell you something that might be uncomfortable for you, then I definitely know you're not going to do anything with it because you haven't proven to me in the past that you were sincere.
You're a teacher, and I am too, with a different portfolio now. But raising game, that's going to become what everyone, including those who never had the impetus to try to raise their game, is going to be called for in the future. How can you imagine yourself waking them up and in in a loving way showing them how to do it? I mean, how do you raise your game?
I think it depends who your audience is, for one thing.
Hmm.
So if I'm in a situation with a group of students who have decided that they want to take a certain class, then there's a bit of a captive element that I have.
That's
It
right.
doesn't mean that everyone is going to be excited about going along on the journey, but it does mean that there's a little bit more that I have in terms of controlling the situation than if it is a different type of delivery, like a corporate delivery. I think making certain that we're continually going back to understanding where someone is coming from and what they are showing you or presenting to you on that given day is key. So that's what you work with. If it is a matter of my assumptions getting in the way of being successful with a group, then truthfully that's something that's on me. And one of the things that I think I've seen over the past years, especially helpful in teaching undergraduates and graduate students, is that when I'm working with my corporate clients, I have the ability to tell them some of the themes that I'm hearing in classes about what these new grads will ultimately be looking for in their organizations.
Cool.
And what I've seen over a period of time has been a shift from a definite focus on sustainability and corporate social responsibility to that plus. So an accretion of those kinds of things as a focus, but also a level of wellness support within organizations that they're very comfortable talking about wanting, and looking at benefits packages that these companies are offering and saying, what are you providing that takes all of these other aspects of who I am into consideration in the benefits package?
You've seen me as a whole person.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
that used to be kind of a saying, holism and whole person. But now, going forward, I think we've learned excruciatingly well the value of personhood and what it takes to be safe, really, and what it will take going forward. I think, though, the what I'm hooking back to is your comment from the beginning that it's important first not to bring your assumptions up and put them between you and a student or a client or me for that matter. And that's really a discipline, a self-discipline that you have. You must be very conscious of being sure in every case going forward that you can fight down the natural impulse to say that's a lazy person over there, and that over there is someone who blah blah blah, and really try to reach the person where you can attract their whole self, if you will, out to into the conversation. And how do I think you do that? Do you notice that, or am I just imagining it?
I think I do that. And part of what's important for me when we look at levers is to consistently be cognizant of the fact that I am there to help them deliver a product. So depending upon what the particular engagement is or what the circumstances I find myself in, that there's an objective. There's a set of objectives that we need to be clear about in terms of what's going on in the organization, or what are we expected to deliver within the course of a semester? What should they be walking out with? So I think that, and this is one of the things that really came up over the past couple months, was being very clear about what objectives are within the short term, the medium term, and the longer term, and understanding that they may need to be adjusted as circumstances present themselves. So to me, it's always how are we delivering for the organization, understanding that there might be some things that need to shift a bit along the way. How do I help the leaders within an organization do that? How do I help a student to do that? And part of it really has to do with initially creating the culture where individuals feel like they have options to provide the kind of feedback that would help to enrich the organization overall. So it's not just about one person's performance. It's not just about me as someone who is guiding a class over a period of time. How do we come together to deliver something that is goes beyond anyone's wildest dreams? And it's interesting because I did look to create different types of survey feedback tools during this period of time and ask questions about the transition. So
Mm-hmm.
how successful did a student feel going from an in-person class to making the transition to largely web-based or some other online work? And what I found interesting is that because of the fact that for a period of time, I had been educating students to learn how to have a web class within the first 2 weeks of the semester, that when some of our circumstances presented themselves, my students already knew how to do it.
Mm.
So it wasn't something that they were uncomfortable with. They were already comfortable with it. And the level of ability to stay focused on the content, I think, was much greater because they had the enabling technology and enabling support to be able to make that shift. And the truth is, this is an emblem of their workplace, even more so now than when we started, that they understand how to also successfully deliver their products, which goes back to when we have these conversations about learning. One of the things, Dave, over a period of time that I never knew when you invited me to come and speak to an in-person class was what the hook would be for the semester. And I mean hook in the most loving manner.
Yep.
Whether we were going to be talking about a theater presentation and a class that was divided into acts, whether we were looking at something that had some other type of organizing framework that was
Yes.
particularly compelling for the students. So I loved going in there because I had an opportunity to be a part of that and understand that your vision was looking at a way to provide a context that was one that could work for the entire semester, had space for all of the students in the room, but also, to be honest with you, would be equally as compelling if you were to turn that into a corporate program delivery. It,
I
it
would have made the big bucks.
it would work because of the fact
Yeah.
that it was so well designed, which goes back to my other point. Part of the conversation that we're having here and the transitions over a period of time really require a level of thought, design, and development to make shifts. So it isn't just simply one day we're in person and the next day we are delivering something online. There is design and development and a feedback loop required for how do you continue to keep people engaged and how do you support them and how do you bring in some of those perspectives of a neurodiverse workforce that we had just spoken about.
Yeah. What I would do, because I don't know if you haven't noticed this, but I'm a storyteller. I think that's probably, you're an attractor, I'm a storyteller. And what the stories that I designed for every course was what they were going to become if they put the effort in. So you met a couple of my students, you've seen them, and for one class, they were to become intrepid time travelers. Keyword intrepid. I didn't realize that times were going to be so different, but I think I developed that for the intro course because I knew from Peter Vale and my influences in reading and discussing and his notion of permanent whitewater that they darn well were going to have to be very intentionally adaptive. And so during those courses, I would run every week a, a, a segment of one of those echo challenges that were on VHS back then. And this one, the last one from my last time, was going through Morocco. So those teams, about 200 started, but by the end, there were about 10 that made it. And because all along the way, the rules were very clear. They all had to stay together as a team, blah, blah, blah. But they went through many terrains. They went through, climb Mount Atlas. They had to do all
I've
that.
been there, Dave.
You've been to Mount
I've
Atlas.
been to the Atlas Mountains, yes.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
And so that would be the example. But I thank you for remembering that. And I think that's true for those you are going to be helping in their designs of how to move forward in their company or even in your colleagues at the university. I think they have to be putting their minds to what we're going to become now that we're learning to live with this horrible virus and probably always will. What are we going to become? And if we can't really help ourselves and them envision becoming something that their hearts beat for in the best way and say, yeah. And I know it sounds a little fakey, but fake it until you make it because there's so much doom and gloom now. And you're not that kind of person. You're going to attract people to a better version of themselves in a better time, come hell or high water. Or again, am I just imposing that in a loving way on you?
No, I think you've got that, but I also think it's part of our responsibility. So in looking at the feedback that I was talking to you about, it is important that the leader has spent the time, the contemplation and action that we talked about before. It's important that I do the work in advance so the me that is presented is the one that's truly in the moment for the team. That it doesn't mean that I don't have days where I'm not as on as others, but it does mean that I need to do the work to ensure that those pieces are in place when I walk into the room, when I connect to the call, when I'm in a situation where it's important for me to be really listening to others, that taking the noise out of my ecosystem head is particularly important to be able to then focus on the individuals and the situation at hand. And one of the best things that I've seen is really when I've had an opportunity to work with teams and talk to them about the difference between process and content. So if it's your team and you are in charge of delivering, you're pretty much focused on the content of the meeting, accomplishing what you need to in order to move to the next step. if I can get leaders to be thinking about the process within the meeting, so understanding levels of participation, who has the ability to influence others effectively, who's taking up the airtime, when that's an opportunity for a leader to step back and look at the process of what's going on within the meeting. They can be more successful at delivering on content because they also know if maybe what they're doing is listening to someone disproportionately because that person just happens to be someone who is more extroverted in meetings.
And again, listening, being more aware, being clear that any moment of leading, different somewhat than managing, you are in the moment. That's it. That's your cue. That's when people are tuned to you, and you are hopefully attuned to them, and that's where they get that feeling of I got it. I want to move forward in this direction. So that kind of awareness is crucial, and certainly you, when you're teaching, are in that leading role. And I love the notion that you're very disciplined about being sure that you free those moments up as much as possible on behalf of those you're serving, not just, for your own sense of well-being, but hey, if I come in prepared, at ease, and attentive, I'm going to attract a lot more of their attention, and I'm going to learn more from them because they're going to talk, they're going to write, they're going to do the creative things that I'm asking them to do, so that I can witness how they're getting along. As a teacher, you can transpose that to any kind of setting. Now, as we're moving toward the end of our time, I want to talk about your future. What do you see yourself doing through this time and out beyond, Linda?
One of the things I found fascinating was the fact that you really laser focused on if someone said to me, you can't do that, or that's just not feasible, what I would do with that. So I had mentioned to you before that over a period of time, I do start semesters off with helping students understand how to make a shift and have a virtual class delivery. So I've been doing that for a period of time, largely because someone coming out of an undergraduate business program should know how to jump on a meeting even before March of this year. So I always did that. And what I'm finding is that individuals who are my peers, whether it's in organizational development and leadership or other areas, are doing the kinds of things that I've been doing for a period of time, which meant that it's a playing field that I'm not as far ahead of as I used to be. So one of the things that was important for me during this period of time is just really bumping up the level of using assistive technology to support deliveries remotely, because clearly the kinds of things that I had done in the past with 50, 100, 300 people in person are not going to be happening in the near future.
Not really.
So how do I take some of the tools that are available and look at just building my capabilities so I can bring in multiple inputs, so I can have my slides and my picture and bring in video, bring in polling, bring in a level of production value that is something that goes beyond where I personally happen to be before. So there's a good bit right now of really that, how do I use this period of time to develop those competencies myself, as well as what does that require in terms of redesigning content? Because to me, the instructional design piece is a very important component to ensure that people, let's be honest, if you've ever sat through any kind of web delivery for more than an hour, you know that it's very difficult to go into that second hour if someone hasn't really engaged you.
Absolutely.
Whether it is
Could be the holy grail that they're offering, but after an hour, we
yeah,
get along without it for 3,000 years. We could, at least I don't need to listen to the next hour. But you're absolutely right. But I really commend you for recognizing, as a practitioner of your sort, that you are not going to be left behind. You refuse to be sidelined because you're looked at as one of those people who really were great live in a meeting room or a classroom, but we're not too sure how she's going to do online, which, by the way, is the terrible fear of perhaps everyone in the org behavior teaching world that I'm in touch with. They did. I was so good in the classroom. What if I can't be there? So preparing is part of it. Testing it out. You made me think of something I noticed yesterday. I've been on a lot of different Zoom events here from home, and they were doing one of the organizations that I support, Connecticut Social Enterprise Trust, was doing a future forum, and they used the breakout rooms very effectively. But then one of the members of our team put up something he had just discovered called Mural, and it was a board with sticky notes, with replica sticky notes that he could organize. And he put the categories up, just like I've seen you do with our whiteboard when you were in my classroom, when you were getting student input and they were coming up, putting their ideas on the board, and you sort them out and give them headings, which is really acknowledging how important their ideas were, even if it was only 2 words. You didn't say, oh, I'm throwing that one out. But anyway, that tool there, I got to figure out how to use that. So I think both of us have the same rebellious nature, that we will look ahead to see in the various contexts where we want to perform what's coming and try to anticipate that. But mostly we are curious to see how it's going to work. It's like we are strategic, but hey, it's like, here's a bright, shiny object. It could really be cool. So the learning is multi-dimensional, multifaceted, like a ball rolling along, picking up bits and pieces. And I want, before we end, to give your horse some credit, because I saw, is it her?
Her.
I saw her on your teacup. And just before we started the call, you told me that you learn from your horse. Now, you got to define that a little bit better for people listening to this podcast, because I think it does fit everything we've said in this last 35 or 40 minutes.
Part of learning from her is the understanding that I need to be in the moment. So in the moment means we could come across all different types of, they may not be obstacles in terms of how I perceive them, but they could be obstacles if I'm not in the moment. So and in fact, it's an interesting thing that you brought that up, because we just recently had an opportunity to do some work in the woods not far from where I have my horse. She wasn't so interested in going through water features. So I needed her to walk through what was a fairly deep, small pond. Let's put it that way. In the past, she'd been lately refusing to go through these water features and wanted to go around them. And she's quite agile. And I needed to make certain that I came up to it and I gave her an opportunity to sniff, maybe splash around a little bit, but our goal was to make our way through it. Now, in the past, when she started to do this, I anticipated prior to coming to the water feature that she was going to give me a little bit of a hard time.
So you tensed up, and she felt it.
Exactly. So this last time we walked up to it, I let her do what she needed to do, and then we simply went through it. And for me, the learning is that every situation provides an opportunity, but it provides an opportunity that you do have the ability to experience differently depending upon how you come to it. So
wonderful.
Coming to it is absolutely key for me, but it's also that piece about having a level of preparedness that's part of the package. So when I do come to it, I can respond in a way that works for all of us.
Because she, as I just interceded, she picked up, she read you, she knows you, she read you. And if she had sensed that you were tensing up, that even in your thoughts, without even your body giving that signal, I think from what I've learned about how empathic horses are, that she would have said, I don't have to do this one.
That's true.
There you go. And or maybe I'll just give her a little toss into the water and underscore that point. Oh, it's been wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to hear your intelligence, your wit, and your determination. You are definitely an attractor to me, and I think you will be when people hear the podcast. And they will be able to reach you how? If someone wanted to reach out and say, Linda, let me tell you what a great experience was to listen to.
I am Linda.Ferraro at valencyconsulting.com. VALENCY consulting.com.
I got to ask you, what is valency? Why valency?
It really is connected to the whole attractor concept.
Whoa.
So you are.
I am brilliant.
Yeah, you actually you really are. As a matter of fact.
Valence is what, the distance between two things.
It's really the attraction. I'm going to leave it for people to interpret it the way they would like, because part of this is also not to be too prescriptive. So one thing I do want to mention, Dave, in thanking you for the concept of the podcast and bringing Peter Vale into our lives in a way that we wouldn't have had the opportunity to experience otherwise. So thank you for that. That's particularly meaningful. All of the individuals that you brought in, as well as the opportunity to learn from you. I think you don't know how large your fan club is.
Wow. I often think, as I've had these conversations since Peter passed away, that I have a headset on for those who are just listening, and that I have this other antenna, and I feel his laugh. Sometimes I hear his good nature coming through. Sometimes a little bit of scolding. David, you're talking too much. But always this comes to mind as I'm closing. Oh, David, I wish I'd had a chance to have that conversation with Linda Ferraro. You would have loved it, Linda, and you would have loved it too.
So Dave, just to give you a very quick introduction, valency is the combining capacity of any atom, the combining power of an atom of the element. So for our perspective, we really truly did live the combining capacity of multiple elements during our time today.
Great way to end.